Welcome. So this week we're getting a little bit of a preview as we're thinking about our very youngest students. So many of you are classroom teachers or teaching assistants. I know that some of you are not. I want you to think about what lesson plans look like for teachers. That really has to do with, what types of objectives do we have? What are we wanting to help students learn? What are the materials that we need? And what are the activities that we're involved in? It becomes more and more structured the older students are, but you might be thinking when we're talking about infants and toddlers, my goodness, that's not going to look very similar to what it would look like for older children, and you're very correct. I'm going to show you a couple different resources that are going to be in place for you this week. The main one is this Colorado Early Learning and Development Guidelines project. This is a large document that I think you will find very helpful, related to essentially standards for our youngest learners. It goes up through third grade, so it's really birth to third grade, but you can see that this first section is tied to birth to age 3. You're going to use these as a guide for what types of things might you want in a lesson or activity. Areas such as physical development and health, social development, emotional development, language and literacy development are all categories that are used, as well as cognitive development, for lesson plans and activities. So we're thinking about, throughout any given day and any given week, how are we touching student needs in each of these areas. Here is an example of an infant lesson plan. You can see that we might come up with titles of activities that we could list here. What is the objective that we're using to help that student? So that could be related to particular things that we're hoping to help them develop. And you can see the different domains listed here, such as cognitive development and what types of materials are needed. Now, if I'm in a classroom with infants, they are all going to be at very different sleep schedules and needs as well. And so part of this is going to be extremely individualized by this age, but we're wanting to make sure to meet all of their developmental domains as well. This is an example of a preschool lesson plan template. I want to highlight the differences because that will be something you'll be working on later this semester as well. You can see some very basic details again. What is the title? What are the materials I need? And the objective is, what do I want a child to learn? You can see as they get older that we may have a very particular time of day that we're trying to use a particular lesson. That said, even by 4 or 5, children are going to be on different schedules, but definitely when we're talking about birth, 1, 2 years old, it's going to be much more individualized. It's also going to be a shorter length of time because we know developmentally that would not be appropriate. We need lots of movement, lots of breaks, lots of time. It might be a couple minutes that we're working on a particular skill or activity with a student. There are preschool standards that we can pull. What I would like you to, when we're looking at things that we're helping preschoolers with, but when we're talking about infants and toddlers, use those standards of learning from that initial document that I was showing you previously. We're going to want to think about, what am I going to do toward the beginning, middle, and end of the lesson? But again, this is much more detailed than what we would our youngest learners. How do I know whether or not they learned what I was teaching them? Part of that is them being able to reproduce what I showed, possibly gaining some new skills, showing some recognition as well. And then what are ways to make this more or less challenging? So this would be based on individual student needs as well. Now, if I have several 6-month-old students, they are going to vary very much so still in terms of their own individual developmental needs. If you're wanting ideas of particular things that students can be working on at a particular age, one thing you can do is Google what is called ASQ. It stands for Ages and Stages Questionnaire. I will show you that in one moment. If you are using Teaching Strategies Gold, you can use that for a resource as well. Let's say I'm looking at working with a child who is 8 months old. You can see that just by Googling, a bunch of things came up right away. And I can click on the 8-month questionnaire to get some ideas of things that a child may be working on. So that's yet another resource that I can use this week as I'm coming up with particular lessons and activities for the students that I serve. The questionnaires all look quite similar. And it has categories such as communication, gross motor, and so on. So if I'm developing an individualized lesson plan, these are particular things I can work with the students that I serve individually at any given time. This is some material from NACE, which is the National Association for Educators of Young Children, talking about what high quality programs look like. We want it to be DAP, or developmentally appropriate practice, something that's not too easy or too hard, so something that they can do with a little bit of our help. That's very related to Lev Vygotsky, who talked about the zone of proximal development. What can our students do with our support? That's going to be based on each individual's age and their stage of development. We're helping each child reach goals that are just right for them, and that is also valuing of the child's family and culture. So the first couple of weeks we looked at our own family and culture and how that might be a support for us, as well as how that shapes our viewing of the world. When we think about materials and activities, we know that some of the things that are important as well have to do with making sure that we have the right types of toys and materials in our classroom, making sure that there are routines as far as pickup and drop-off time. And when you're making your lesson plan for children, again, think about physical development, think about their social and emotional development, think about their cognitive development, and think about their language development. NACE is always a great website to look at. So again, that is www.nace.org. And you can see here I'm looking at high quality programs for infants. But it is a wealth of information and a website that you should become very familiar with in terms of knowing the good research, the best research really, in our field. So again, when we think of infants or toddlers, we know that lessons are going to look quite a bit different, and what a day looks like is going to look quite different. When we're working with our youngest learners, the eating schedule and sleeping schedule is varied, right? As they move further into toddlerhood and into their preschool years, there's more of a set routine, but there's still going to be great individual difference in terms of how much they are sleeping, how long they are sleeping. But when we're talking about our youngest learners, it's extremely individualized. So this is just one way that you could write your lesson plan, but I'd like you to think of a lesson plan that would highlight activities and lessons in those different domains for a child that you work with and submit that. That could be through any type of program, but that might be through a Microsoft Word, that might be through a template. So as you start looking at different templates, use Google, use the internet to pull up different types of lesson plans and different types of ideas for tracking your work with the students that you would work with, either for real, for those of you that are in schools right now, or hypothetically. When we go back to that Colorado document for early standards and early learning, please note it lists suggested supports for adults. So here we have an example of gross motor, and we want to help a young infant as they're demonstrating control of their head and neck. So young infants may sit on the floor with one leg closer to the body than the other. Now here it lists things that we can do. I see this as a key thing in a classroom, for instance. It says avoid prolonged periods of time in devices that restrict movement, such as mechanical swings and baby carriers. So these are things to watch out for and things that I might want to highlight in terms of physical activities that I do in my classroom. Tummy time on the floor, outside time. I was just reading an article today talking about early childhood health and well-being and how young children are missing much outdoor time, which is, not good for their physical development and also for their health and well-being in terms of just developing those motor skills and also staying at a healthy weight and level of activity. I look forward to seeing all of your work this week in terms of where you're at with your child's study projects and where you are making some hypothetical lesson plans for our youngest learners. As always, at any time, feel free to send me an email or a text if you have questions, and I'll look forward to another week with you. Bye-bye.